GPU costs have been steadily increasing over the last while, and a lot of people have been wondering why, blaming cryptocurrencies and blaming this and that, and some people have just been making speculation that it's all a conspiracy to increase GPU costs and just make it really expensive for us to have gaming PCs, which isn't the case. Michael here with another topic video, and today we're going to be talking about why GPUs are so expensive, why they're increasing, and why the cost might actually increase for quite a while to come, and why we might actually see any solution for a while. Now, there is a solution in the future, and hopefully we can get there, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, such as silicon wafers. Maybe more people start developing them, or maybe we find an alternative to silicon, or maybe there's going to be more competition within the GPU space ends up making it so that the demand is high enough for companies and factories, and I'll talk about it. But regardless, normally for these topic videos, I have something more simple, and normally it's like, oh, hey, I have one subject and I talk about that subject, and then it kind of continues off of there. Unfortunately, this one's a little bit more complicated than that. It is one of those situations to where it's just, there are so many reasons why this is happening, and I see the question a lot. A lot of people ask me, like, why are GPU costs so expensive, especially in our gaming Discord, link in the description. And so, yeah, I just kind of want to make a video about it and talk about what's going on exactly. Now, the history of GPU costs have always been kind of increasing over time. For example, the last generation of the 1070 and 1080 were like $10 to $20 higher than the generation before, which is a little bit higher of a hike than normal. Normally, it's only like $5 to $10. And this is just because of, one, inflation, and two, the technologies that they use and the materials that they use get more and more expensive as time goes on. And there are some manufacturing costs that do decrease the cost of this over time, such as, wafers get easier to make, or maybe metals are easier to produce, and the licensing costs and proprietary costs are lower, and so on and so forth, but generally they have a small hike. However, the interesting part about this generation right now is the fact that they are still steadily increasing, and the reasons for this are kind of tenfold. One, demand has increased in several different ways. One, we have gaming PCs are being built more than ever before, and companies that are building pre-built are actually going to be building more and more computers over time as well. They're also using GPUs in other sorts of hardware, such as laptops are finally getting GPUs in standard edition, so like those standard $400 laptops are starting to get GPU units now. APUs are still fairly popular, such as the AMD APUs. I know my sister's laptop has one of those. However, they are, not nearly as powerful. They're a lot cheaper, but when you end up getting into the higher end laptops, you're definitely going to be starting to see a lot of GPUs. So for example, you end up having NVIDIA kind of pushing for that mobile space, and they have that sort of stuff going on, which is actually kind of nice. So GPU costs are increasing because demand's increasing, and we also have cryptocurrencies kind of going on right now to where everyone wants to build these mining rigs to mine cryptocurrencies. Now, if you don't understand what cryptocurrencies are and how they're mined and everything, don't worry about it. I'm not going to cover it here. You can end up looking it up, but long story short, they use GPUs to solve algorithms and do all this complicated jargon. And basically that gives them cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies can be exchanged for goods just like any other sort of currency. And so it's kind of like, you use your GPU to solve problems and then you get paid for it. That's the simplicity of it. And they also manage the network and yada yada. Once again, I'm not going to cover it deep, but if you're interested in it, go ahead and look it up because it is very, very interesting. So that's actually been a huge problem as well, to where a lot of these groups and actual large companies are actually buying huge pallets of these graphics cards, and so the increase in demand makes it so that there is a shortage. Now you may be wondering, okay, so if there's a shortage of them, why aren't manufacturers just being like, hey, we're going to produce more of them? This is where things actually get fairly complicated, and this is where the wafers come in, or silicon, more accurately. So every single thing that is a chip that needs memory stored uses wafers. And so basically these are little tiny microchips, essentially, or pieces of microchips that are used in silicon technologies. And so if it uses silicon, which is basically every single CPU, GPU, memory, basically everything inside your computer uses a silicon base to conduct electricity and form its binary code that is functioned through the CPU and system, and basically makes it so it can function. It carries electricity through it so that it can perform actions. These are on a shortage, not necessarily because silicon. There is the silicon gradual cost increase that has been happening over the last few years because we are technically running out of silicon, and silicon is getting harder and harder to kind of produce with. There are less factories able to kind of manufacture them, and these factories are extremely expensive to build and make. However, I'll talk about that a little bit later. But long story short, the factories that are making these are kind of running out. And this isn't just because of GPUs. No, they're not increasing GPU production. Yes, it is slightly increasing because they want to make money. That's great. But where the money is actually not GPUs, but rather phones or memory NANDs, such as SSDs. These are the technologies that are making them tons of money at the moment, and so they're going to continue doing that. However, for these factories to actually keep producing oh God, that almost nearly murdered me. Yikes, I should have been paying attention. I apologize for that. I'm playing Final Fantasy XII in the background, by the way. I forgot to mention that in the beginning of the video. But these companies, in order for them to function, these factories are extremely expensive to kind of build and maintain. And so when you have the situation to where people want more of something produced, they have to weigh out the costs. And certain groups have been like, okay, we're just going to increase our costs, such as, I think it's SOCOM. That's a video game name. I don't remember what they're called. It's like SOK and then, or SOC and then something. Maybe it's SOCOM. I don't know. SOCOM is also a shooter genre, or not genre, but series from Sony, I believe. Or it was on the PS. Anyways, back on topic. Yeah, several of these companies have been like, all right, we're just going to have to increase our production costs to make it so that we can actually produce more chips. But they can still only have so much space, and so if they want to expand their space, they have to expand their factories, and that goes into a whole nother list of problems that goes into expanding costs. So basically, the NANDs that they need, or the wafers that they need to make the NANDs for GPUs, is running out, because it's being used in everything from, let's say, GPUs, so anything that needs to store memory, basically, in most of our technologies. So if it needs to store memory in like a GPU for a VRAM, or if it needs to actually be RAM, or if it actually needs to go inside a phone. And phones are actually hugely increasing the cost because phones is where the money is. Companies like Samsung, I almost said Sony for a second. Jeez, I am spilling my words all over the place. Companies like Samsung and Apple are, investing heavily in phone technologies, and even Nvidia and stuff has been kind of working out, but they don't actually, take from factories and yada yada, but not going to get into that today. But these companies have been going into phones and being like, hey, we need to make as many phones as possible. And with so many different new models and testing and prototypes that are going into it, they're paying a lot for these wafers to end up going into it. And all their other technologies as well, but mostly wafers, because that is where all their memory NAND comes from. And you need that for the base of the phone. So if you build any new type of prototype, you're going to need several of these. And if you want to produce a new phone, like they do every single year for whatever reason, then that next year they're going to need a whole new set. And so it's not like they're just building like a new console every like 6 years or something. They're constantly producing these, and they're constantly putting these out, and it's constantly costing them a lot of money. But these manufacturers get a lot of good deals, and they're like, hey, all right, well, we're a giant factory, we can produce all these, and so they get to make a ton of money off of this, and it keeps their company afloat. And since they have been expanding on this idea, and they've been screwed over on this in the past, a lot of these companies are very scared to expand too far. And so basically what they're doing is they're cutting out the other men that aren't making them nearly as much money to make it so that they can make as much money as possible and ensure that their company's not going to fall flat if the market crashes. Because if, let's say, silicon becomes impossible to get, then all of a sudden their company is just going to fall flat because it requires so much silicon, and their entire business model is based off of that. Now, obviously, these companies normally do have multiple factories, so it's not like just one factory making all this silicon. No, it's like a bunch of different factories making a lot of different microchips and yada yada. But at the same time, they're making sure to cover their butts. And so the fact of the previous crashes in the tech industry to where they ended up running out of different materials and actually running into issues with this has kind of played into part of this. And so a lot of these wafer manufacturers have announced that they're going to be increasing these costs as well. Now, there is one also kind of increase to the cost that we've ended up seeing as well, which is just the general increase in technology in general, as in also, not only silicon has increased in cost, but also all the other material costs and the loss of several different contracts and different sort of technologies that are going into these things. Like I was talking about earlier with the APUs and mobile GPUs, there's a lot of different spaces that these companies are going into now. And so they rely a lot less on the GPUs, even though, building PCs has become more and more common, and GPU costs have been, or GPU purchases have been steadily increasing, although I think the total number of purchases has gone down, but I think the actual net income has increased quite drastically. But you get what I'm saying. even though that's been going on, there's also other technologies that these companies are kind of worried about as well, and they can't exactly abandon those, especially, AMD investing so heavily into APUs. Them just kind of abandoning the market would kind of screw them over. And so this has kind of led to a lower priority, I would say, in certain cases. Now, obviously, that is mostly speculation in a lot of people's cases, because these companies are not going to outright say, like, oh, we're abandoning GPU. No, they're not. For one, they're not going to abandon GPUs. Some people have been speculating and making conspiracy theories of like, oh, they're trying to get rid of home PCs and just make us all use APUs, which I doubt is actually the case. I seriously don't think that. And NVIDIA has actually made some sort of workarounds to try and decrease costs. They've been encouraging the retailers, such as, online retailers or factories, to kind of sell limited quantities. However, these miners, generally speaking, when it's actually like freelance, except for these large companies that are just buying giant pallets of these things, like they'll buy like 50 GPUs at a time or more. Like they'll buy like 200 of them and be like, all right, we're going to buy 200 of them, done. But generally speaking, the general miner will end up buying like, a few, like 4 or 5, and then they'll just, kind of use those until it can pay for another one, and then they'll kind of move on to the next set. So there are some things that are going down to decrease the cost of these ever increasing costs. So basically, like I said, NVIDIA kind of encouraging retailers to sell only limited quantities. And of course, we also have a competitive market that is going into. However, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, because why are they still increasing today? It comes down to just competition. Like I was speaking about, there isn't much competition in the space. And so basically what would normally happen in a free market is you would have one company that would be like, oh, hey, I'm going to increase my cost. But then you have all these other companies like, oh, well, you're going to increase your cost. Well, we want your business. And so we're going to decrease our costs and make it so that these are easier to get for these companies. And they're going to kind of take hold of that. These markets don't have that. These markets are lacking that. And that is where the potential decrease in cost comes from, because it could actually end up, scourging in some competition. However, for the time being, we don't have that. And these factories are so extremely expensive to build and maintain that the chances of competition jumping up soon is pretty unlikely. And so if you're looking to build a PC, I would, one, wait and buy secondhand. There are a lot of secondhand GPUs you can end up buying, and these are where a lot of people have been cutting the costs on their PC builds. The current cost for GPUs is absolutely ridiculous. Last time I checked, which is about 2 or 3 months ago, on the GPU that I bought 2.5 years ago, or maybe it was 2 years ago, I think I'm edging on 2.5 years, is my GTX 1070. And so that is, it was like $430 when I bought it. This is an MSI Gaming X or whatever. Last time I checked, it was $530 on Newegg. And obviously they were out of stock, but that was absolutely ridiculous of a cost. And so they're pretty expensive. However, if you end up buying it from somebody secondhand, as long as you're careful with who you're buying from, you can actually get them down to like $250 or $300. And because, miners aren't going to be necessarily interested in secondhand, they've gotten their use out of theirs, but you do have to be careful when you are buying these. And so if you want to end up getting GPUs at reasonable costs, try to buy them secondhand if you possibly can. Obviously, not available to everyone, and depends on your location on if anybody is going to end up having them available, but at the same time, that is how costs are decreasing. And then obviously in the future, we can end up seeing a lot of competition inside the space. Silicon, some people have suggested that maybe silicon is just becoming, too impossible to work with. I don't believe that's possible, or, I don't believe that's happened yet. It is possible, obviously. We are going to get to a point where we just can't make NANDs any smaller, and we are going to run into some performance problems and just so many technical issues that we're going to have to move away from silicon to make anything faster, or we're going to have to move to some new technology, maybe a new architecture or something along those lines. Once again, that's technical also. I won't cover it too deep. But we could end up seeing a lot of competition inside the space. I don't think it's because we're running out of silicon. I think it's because these companies are able to increase their costs, and they don't have any reason to decrease their costs and make it so that they are manufacturing more, because they're not necessarily running out of silicon. They are running out of the specific sizes that are used for these technologies. And one thing that we could end up seeing is technologies maybe using different sizes to kind of take advantage of this and be like, oh, hey, well, you're producing a ton of this, but you're also producing a ton of this, and not all of it's getting used as much, and it's not in a shortage. Maybe we can end up using that for a quick GPU or something along those lines. Like maybe we can end up seeing some weirdly sized graphics cards in the future that use a weird different type of architecture. Maybe they end up finding a way to make ARM work, and so they can end up using those in phones and end up cutting costs quite a bit and make it so that phones are a lot cheaper, because phones are freaking ridiculously expensive. But until we end up getting that competition inside the space, we're not going to see a decrease in GPU costs. And so if you're ever wondering why GPU costs are so expensive, that's pretty much it. Basically, it's a bunch of different factors kind of going into one. A lot of people have been blaming the cryptocurrencies, like I said, and that is partially to blame, but it is mostly on the fact that we just don't have enough silicon being produced inside of these advanced components, and so it's just kind of running into issues. Like we're just not producing enough of it. It's kind of like, you know, imagine if every single person on the entire planet Earth needed to have a sword in their hand. Obviously, we're going to start running out of factories to build swords, because eventually, if everyone needed a sword every year, like a new blade, then we're just going to, like, we're only going to have so many factories, and then somebody comes out with, like, a new special blade. You know, it's going to be like, oh, hey, well, now we want to produce, you know, twice as much. And then, you know, the more you end up increasing this, the more fancy of swords people want, the more complicated things are going to get. That was a terrible analogy, but I'm playing Final Fantasy 12 in the background, so I thought I would make it try to tie in somehow. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this one. And if you like my styles of content or anything else that I end up producing, you can end up looking me up on the Patreon. And oh god, I am dying everywhere here, so I'm just going to switch out my party members because I can do that. Pinillo is... Oh, she got revived. Okay, never mind. We're good. But yeah, and you can also end up joining our Discord. Our gaming Discord is the Broken Chat Box, a link in the description as well. It's a nice little gaming community, not too active at the moment, but we do talk about video games and tech and stuff when we hang out and do video games and things. So if you're looking for a community to join, try the Broken Chat Box. And no, we don't monetize it, but you can subscribe on Patreon and get a special little flag for you. That's the thing that happens. Anyways, I'm going to shoot more ghosts, which totally makes sense. See you guys in the next video. So I have all the gambits on, so I can just sit here, set my controller down, and watch them fight. Crap, it died.